YouTube. All right, let me just double check this over here. I really need someone to handle this for me on the side.
Jamie?
I know, right?
Jamie, can you find that video of the bear?
Oh. Okay, there we go. Okay, broadcast. Nice. So we should be live everywhere. Checking.
Yeah.
Nice. So we should
say
be
on air when we're live.
Live. Yeah, we're on air everywhere.
Oh, it is. Okay.
Checking.
Yeah. Yeah.
Nice. So we should
say on air when we're live.
Live. Yeah, we're on air everywhere. I've got
it is.
crazy echoes going on.
Yeah.
Nice. Are you having that problem too?
Say on air. No.
Yeah, we're on.
Yeah, that's
nice. I've got crazy echoes going on.
It might just be like having all the streams open. That might be part of it.
Are you having that problem too? I see. I found it.
No.
There we go. It was. All right, welcome. Assalamu alaikum, brother.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. Thank you so much for having me on here, Brother Abdurrahman.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, no, I've been following your stuff for quite a while, and it's good to finally connect face to face.
I didn't even follow you for a while, man. That's always interesting to hear.
Yeah, no, I'd say like maybe like a year. I've like known of you. Like I've seen like your thumbnails and stuff like that for like a little while. But no, I've sort of seriously been interacting and like seeing your stuff on my feed for probably like a year, maybe something like that.
Yeah. Nice. Tell me a little bit about yourself, man. You are a revert from which country?
I'm from America, so I'm an American.
From America, okay, cool.
Yeah.
How old are you, if I may ask?
I'm 20 years old.
So, man, you're young.
Yeah, I am pretty young. Yeah.
How does a 20? Sorry, my echo thing is killing me. How does a 20-year-old in America? I don't know. Is Caucasian the right word? Do we have to be politically correct
here? You can just call me white, dude. I don't care. Like,
how's a white boy in America come to?
That works.
Come to Islam.
Yeah. So the answer is actually kind of ironic. I first kind of started even looking into Islam when I read the autobiography of Malcolm X. Oddly enough, so I was about 14 when I read it. I read it in one of my English classes, and I remember just like, I'm assuming you've read it. Like it's
yeah, I did actually.
Yeah, it's a fantastic story, and also
it
just
really
the like sort of towards the end, like just seeing how Islam, like following the principles of Islam and the teachings of Islam, really just transformed his life. And it was actually the last chapter, the second to last chapter, maybe, when he goes to Mecca and he does the Hajj and he sees like all these different people from all over the world and they're Muslim. And he sees like, there's one quote that really stuck out to me. He says like, I saw Muslims, their hair was the blondest of blonde, their eyes were the bluest of blue. And we ate from the same plate and we were brothers and we were all Muslims. And like, I don't know if the camera quality is great, but like that matches like my description very well. And just reading that, it sort of made me think like, oh my gosh, like Islam is a religion like I could accept. Like obviously like Islam is for everybody in like an abstract sense, but like for a lot of white people or a lot of people and a lot of Americans especially, it's like Islam is kind of seen as like, oh, that's like their religion, you know, like they're Muslim over there, you know, and like we're Christian, I guess, even if people aren't religious, there's like, okay, this is like the religion of the land, I suppose. And so like seeing that, it kind of threw that whole idea like away, because it's like, okay, here are these white people and they're Muslim and they're following the same teachings. I'm like there's got to be something to this, you know, like I've never seen such a powerful like sort of sense of brotherhood that he's describing. So then I started reading into Islam and just reading about the theology. It was very, very coherent, you know, like one God. That's a very simple idea that a lot of people can get behind. And just sort of seeing this, I started like following some of like the Dawa content online, like seeing different arguments and whatnot. And I started reading the Quran, and just seeing how, just reading it, and like there were a lot of passages that really stuck with me. I just saw like sort of the beauty of it, and it was really the thing that kind of tipped me over the edge was reading the life of the Prophet, slice of them, because I saw, I just going through his life, I'm like, okay, this is who the man who brought this religion was, and you can see the sincerity in his actions and how dedicated he was to the mission, and also just like him succeeding at the end was very it was sort of like you're reading like a hero's tale almost. Like here's this man, he's going through all this persecution, people are beating him up, but he still sticks to the truth, to religion, and he succeeds in the end. And I remember like I read the Sealed Nectar in English, and I remember reading like he gives the sermon, like the final sermon, and it's like this sense of like a victory, like the truth has won, like Muhammad has come, he's bringing the final message, and he's sort of won. He's, after all the stuff he went through, he's finally won. And I see like how dedicated he was, how he's treating people. He's not just bringing a religion and some beliefs and some like weird cult or whatever. He's bringing a whole transformation to the world. And so just seeing that, I'm like, okay, I think he's the last prophet. Like this seems like he makes a claim, and this is absolutely validated by who he is. His message is very coherent with the rest of the prophets. Everybody's preaching one God. And yeah, but like I say, like one of the things I was kind of looking for when I first started looking into Islam that kind of made me look towards religions, I was just looking for like sort of that sense of higher purpose, moral discipline, just because a lot of people, like I didn't grow up in a religious family. Like my family's Catholic, but like I didn't grow up religious. Like I've been to church like maybe a few times, but I always kind of saw religion as important. Like I'm like, okay, you need to have some sort of religious guidelines to your life in order to have like a purposeful life. And I saw the utility of it. It's just that like I didn't really think about much like, okay, like what's true or not. I didn't know anything about Islam, but then just seeing all this stuff kind of made me realize like, oh my gosh, this is the truth right here,
Somewhat similar stories, actually. I was a young man when I accepted Islam. I think I was around like 22, 23.
Oh wow, mashallah.
And I also read Malcolm X's book, but I think it was just after I accepted Islam. One of the things that surprised me was the whole ethnicity thing. That was the biggest shocker for me, actually. And that I've always been a person where it's like if I have a space or a place of ignorance inside of my head, I try to clear that up.
Yeah.
And there was a guy, I don't want to say his first and last name. I'll say his first name, but his name was Thomas. And we went to high school together, and then he just disappeared. And what happened was, we grew up together in a Department of Defense school, and he got deployed. So, because normally the pipeline is Department of Defense children, so we were Air Force children, usually go directly into the military, and or something close to that. And so he got deployed to Saudi during the first Gulf War. And when he came back, he told me he's Muslim. Because I was like, I wanted to party. I was like, hey, let's go party, man. You're back. You're alive. You didn't get blown up. And he's like, oh, man, I'm Muslim. I don't party anymore. I was like, how you a Muslim? You're a white dude. He's a white guy like you. And I was like, it's impossible. I was like, Islam is for like brown people, Africans, and Arabs. I'm like, you're a white dude. How are you a Muslim? And he was laughing, and he started explaining Islam to me. And I was like, okay, I don't know anything about Islam. And so I just started like exploring it from there. But he was already like quite compelling because we'd spent our whole life together. So he knew how to speak to me. And this goes back to the whole ilm of Islam, the beauty of Islam. Like, one of the prerequisites of dawah is to know the people you're giving dawah to, which kind of segues in further into the conversation I want to have later on about reverts giving dawah in the West because we know our people. But anyway, he was really good and very compelling. Didn't have, I'm the same way. I was like, you need to have a belief system that's higher than the one that's created by men because men are faulted just like me. Yeah. I was like, I've been around too many people who swore up and down they were correct. They were experts in their field and they were wrong. And now you want to tell me how I'm going to live life? I'm risking it just like you're an expert in your field. I'm risking my whole life, with my morality and whatever not, with with these people. I don't want to rant too long because you're my guest, but
Yeah.
yeah, it's a similar story in a sense.
Yeah, I know what you mean there. Like it's actually funny. I wanted to join the military, oddly enough, when I was younger as well. Like I was in this program called Sea Cadets, which is sort of like
Okay,
a, you know what that is?
like ROTC.
Yeah, it's like JROTC.
Yeah.
Actually, like for all my beef with like the military, obviously with sort of the wars and stuff like that, like I actually think for individual people, it's actually a really good program because like a lot of kids lack, especially young men, they lack like discipline, they lack like
Yep.
teamwork skills, social skills. And the military, like it actually gives a lot of that. It teaches you like how to respect people, like
Yep.
you're always taught like, okay, refer to the people by the right ranks, ma'am, sir. Like you're always speaking to adults with a sense of respect. It's never like, whereas a lot of people nowadays, there's like this sense of like, you don't treat adults with respect, which is very problematic in our culture, I believe, especially when it comes
Absolutely.
to people's parents. So it's like, yeah, like I learned that from the military, like always say ma'am and sir to people, like stuff like that. You have like structure, you're waking up early, you're doing physical trainings and stuff like that. Some of them are pretty hard. Like I did this one where it was like, it's called field operations. We did it out and it was actually in Iowa. So I went out there and we literally spent like a week just like out in the field, like sleeping outside. They're making you do like marches. You're eating MREs all day. It was rough, but it was like actually like a really good experience in the end.
Not really.
It's just, yeah, it kind of sucks though, because like obviously, like if you join the military, then you're kind of at the mercy of whatever the people above you. There's a very structured chain of command, so it's like you do that, and it's like if you disobey, like you can go to jail for a long time. And so then, like as a Muslim, especially when half the wars we fight are in the Middle East, it's very problematic. That was actually one of the things. Like these things were kind of happening simultaneously, and like when I sort of decided I wanted to become Muslim, like okay, I don't think I want to join the military anymore because like I think I couldn't see how they were compatible.
Yeah, you'd be amazed at how many people actually accepted Islam in the military. Like I think most of my closest brothers are all reverts from military service.
Really?
I mean, the people, when I think to myself, like this brother, if I turn around, I could leave $1 million on the table, whatever. Those brothers are all people who accepted Islam in the military. But that's not an encouragement to join the military. Don't do it. It's not permissible. It used to be a family tradition of mine, actually. I guess I'm the first one to break it. But we used to, every generation of male would serve in the military. And this comes back from the mentality of like, because my family, we're going to just kick it out there. My family were escaped slaves. And they actually went back and they fought. So there's just been this mentality that we need to have someone who has martial skills. When I say martial, is in military skills in the family at all times, because you never know. Someone can enslave you from next week to the next. Yeah. And so that mentality stayed with our family up until this generation. So my sons will be the last ones to serve. We kind of dropped the tradition. But I still hold that people in general, but Muslims in specific, need to go into some sort of martial arts. Yeah. Because again, it teaches you that discipline and respect. And I think this is lacking amongst the Ummah also, you know, this discipline and respect, because nobody has the fear, okay, we shouldn't punch to the face, but nobody has the fear of getting punched in the face. Yeah. You know, and so there's this just disregard that shouldn't be present when we're interacting with one another as men and Muslims. You know, the Sahabis trained together. They knew who was a good sword fighter. They knew who was a good spear fighter. They knew who the best were. I think we need something similar nowadays also. There was respect, not only based upon Islam. That was the primary thing, of course, obviously. But there was also the understanding, like, don't get in the way of Umar. Radiallahu anhu. You know, he was known for being that guy. So, yeah.
No, I agree. I would actually expand it, not just from like martial. I think martial arts, absolutely. Like I box I box right now, kind of on and off. But I think that I think just sports in general. Like I think that's kind of lacking, especially with Muslims that I talk to. Because like I will say, like America, like very much has a sports culture. Like everybody plays sports. Like it's kind of a thing. Like when you go through high school, you're required to play a sport in some fashion, which I think is really good. Because you learn a lot of things. Like you learn how to respect the coaches, you learn how to listen to coaches, you learn how to play as a team. Like if everyone just like looks out for themselves, then you're just going to have like petty competition. You're not going to be able to, especially certain sport, like team sports, like football is a great example of that. I played football in high school, and like the amount of like that is a sport where coaching is so important, and following the coaches and having like disciplined teams really makes a difference. So I think Muslims should be involved in maybe football. Like I understand it's not for everyone just because head injury risks and stuff like that. I totally understand if people don't want to do that, but I think sports of any kind. Also, I just think it keeps you in shape, encourages, it develops that sort of like being physically fit mindset, because you're like, okay, I'm training for something.
No, absolutely. I agree.
Yeah.
I'm actually thinking in the Muslim world, the only real cooperative sports I can think of are like football, not American football.
Yeah.
Or the European soccer, as we call it.
I call it soccer.
It's soccer.
Yeah.
I've just been out of the US so long, I've been calling it football.
No.
And like cricket.
Yeah.
You know, so it's like, you know, this might, you kind of stumbled on something here that might be very important. Because when you think about it, even when people are like in the West, they're unifying in like cohesion just for their teams.
Yeah.
There's a type of unity that it seems like the Muslims are lacking. And I'm not saying we should unify upon sports, obviously not unify upon Islam, but maybe it would help. I don't know.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. I think that it's just like certain sports, like it's just like, did you play sports in high school, like team sports?
Yeah.
What'd you play?
I played basketball. I did track, and I did football. I usually got kicked off the team though. Bad attitude.
Damn. Fair enough. Well, the other thing, like you sort of learn, like, okay, like you're like bad behavior isn't put up with by people, because they're like,
it's not tolerated.
Yeah, because there's like certain guys, like, they might be really good, but if they're just such a menace with I'm not saying it like this, but like I'm saying, they're just like, if coaches just don't like you for having a bad attitude or whatever, like that's very toxic to the team. And
absolutely.
No, but it's really something. Like the guys I played football with, like, you know, when you're winning and you're in like a close game, like everyone's kind of in it together, you know, you're all like, it's almost like you're fighting a battle in a sense, obviously not the same stakes, but it's like, you're kind of there together. Everyone's there for each other. And I've actually, there's an initiative close to where I live, and they're doing, it's like they started like a flag football, like it's called Muslim Complex. It's actually competitive. Okay. I thought it was going to be like some crappy masjid league when my friend invited me, but it's actually like really competitive. Like the guys are good. It's really competitive games. People are actually skilled and competent and whatnot. And it was a lot of fun. Like everybody was getting closer together, but like after the games, people are getting competitive in the games, but after the games, everybody's brothers at the end. There's kind of a mutual bond between all the teams in a sense. And like at the beginning of the season, everybody's making dua beforehand. Together, like they're sort of doing a group dua, and it was really, really neat. Like it was sort of like you're building that sort of brotherhood with the sports, but you're also kind of creating, you're centering it around Islam. And
that's awesome.
Yeah, no, it's a great initiative. I also think it was like an adult league. It was like a really big mix of ages. So there's some kids, like my team was really young. There were a lot of high school kids on our team, but we were playing against teams that had like guys that are like in their 30s, 40s. So it's really good at kind of bringing the different age groups together to play.
You know, not to laud or encourage military service, but you know, that's the beauty of it's this league you're discussing. It sounds like the military, you know, in the sense in the military that the guy next to you, he's so important for victory, for the completion of the mission, that you don't have the opportunity, you don't have the luxury is probably the better word than opportunity to be racist, to like, you know, is he black, is he white, is he Mexican, is he this, is he that? It just doesn't exist. It's like, this is my teammate, this is my guy, and if it all goes down, I have no choice but to depend on him. Yeah. And it creates a bond that's just, I mean, all of the brothers that I have, they fit the entire spectrum of the ethnic. You know, you've got Asian guys. I mean, Asian is in Pakistani.
Yeah.
There's a brother named Sadiq. He's not a revert, but you know, he was military service. Got this brother Yahya online. That's why he's a white guy. I mean, it's like you got Arabs, you got this, you got that one, but that bond from that background, I really would like to see something set up in the Ummah in general, so that we'd have a more of a brotherhood mentality. I'm quite sure you've been watching my ex. I'm playing the whole racial, the whole racial ethnic game. I don't care about that stuff, but I like to reflect back to the ethnic guys, what they do to reverts. Sometimes, not all reverts, but sometimes. So it's like, it's your group and my group, and they don't like it. So it's like, I like to hold up the mirror and let them see it. I don't know if it's going to fix anything, but I hope it brings to light people's behavior so that they see what they're doing. We need something like that to bring people together in general. It's supposed to be Islam, but maybe we need Islam and something else.
Yeah, it's possible. I think the stuff, sort of the stuff with the reverts, it might be I think it really depends on where you are. Because in America, there's a lot of brothers, especially from immigrant backgrounds, will put people convert to Islam on this massive pedestal. They're especially white people. I think that one definitely has a racial component, because it's sort of oh my gosh, the white convert is so rare. It's he must know something we don't, or I don't know what it is, but it's they put you on this big pedestal, and then they expect I think that can be I would, especially for someone like me who's young, that can be really hurtful. Not hurtful in the sense of, it can just be damaging for you, because you sort of develop this false sense of, I guess, sort of a savior status almost. You're everyone's giving you all this praise, brother, you're so much, literally some guy's dad, one of my good friends, his dad, I was at his wedding, his dad was brother, you're so much better than me. I'm we just met, you have no idea who I am. So it's just
it's a bit weird.
That I think that can be really harmful to people, because then they sort of, you also develop too high expectations, because let's face it, not every convert is going to become this perfect sheikh or whatever. That's not saying you should not seek knowledge, but it's just not the reality.
Absolutely.
Some people are going to be at varying levels of religiosity, and so I feel it can be very overwhelming to certain people. And then also there's also this kind of expectation, and I don't know if this is on it's kind of, so in America, my family, I'm descended from immigrants, so your immigrants come in and they typically assimilate into the local culture, right? So they, over a few generations, maybe the people will be culturally indistinguishable from everyday Americans, right?
Indeed.
Obviously it's somewhat regional. With Muslim converts, it's kind of the opposite. You have inverse assimilation. So you have people who convert to Islam, and they'll kind of almost leave their American culture and enter this kind of hybrid immigrant culture. You'll see this with they might start dressing differently. They might start adding new slang to their things. I'm not talking about saying mashallah. Obviously that's different from adding yani or people those words that are slang for Arabs into sort of their everyday vocabulary. And I think that can just be that can kind of be off-putting for other people who might be considering Islam, because then you've added cultural things that are not even part of the religion. And it sort of gives the impression to some people that oh, if I want to become Muslim, I got to switch who I am. I can't be David Williamson. I have to be Dawood Williamson or whatever. And absolutely. That's not to say you shouldn't change your name. It's just that it's kind of, I guess, the frame you enter is more important.
No, I agree. When I first became Muslim, I was wearing thawbs and I was wearing gutras and stuff and whatnot, and at some point I just kind of dropped it. I was like, why am I dressing like this? It's like, I didn't find the obligation after talking, listening to some of the ulama, and I was like, well, I can meet the conditions of covering my aura in my clothing, as long as your isbal is and whatnot. I was like, let me just go ahead and dress how I'm going to dress, according to my people. Because when I was looking at other Muslims also, they're doing the same thing. The Indonesians don't dress like the Pakistanis don't dress like the Arabs. So I'm like, why am I coming along dressing like this one or that one? And so, yeah, back to my
There's also kind of this weird, like, I guess, monoculture in a sense of like the Gulf Arab sort of thobe is kind of like seen as like this almost quasi universal uniform for a Muslim. Like I've even seen like some Desi kids will have like some Muslim event, like whether it be through MSA or whether it be like other organizations will have an event, and like it's like, okay, wear like formal attire, like Muslim attire, and like even people who are not Arab will wear like a thobe, but you'll never see an Arab wear like shalwar kameez or something like that.
Yeah.
So, and then I'm the only one wearing a suit, of course, and so yeah, I think that clothing it's sort of mundane, but it's also not, because it's sort of like people make first impressions. People judge you, make a lot of judgments about everybody based on how they look. If you see a dude who's like really, really buff, you're probably going to be a little bit scared of him, whether you want to or not. And so if you see somebody who's like well dressed or like, you know, has put together versus somebody who's wearing like, I don't know, like say like a really dirty t-shirt and like shorts or whatever, it's just automatically the guy in a suit could be a total charlatan, like weirdo, and the guy in the whatever and like the bad outfit could just be like some super successful dude. But you would automatically just make a judgment about that. And that especially comes to when you're sort of, I guess, giving dawah, is when even if say you're doing dawah like on the street or whatever, and you're wearing like a thobe, automatically, regardless of whether you want to or not, you're going to convey some sort of message to the person you're speaking to that like you're from a different culture, you know?
Yes.
Even if you're not, you could be the most American dude out there. Like you could even be a white dude. Like it's just that kind of conveys, it just kind of subconsciously conveys a message that you maybe don't want to send to that person.
For sure.
Because a lot of people, like you see, get people, and Muslims do this too, usually not as religious ones. They'll sort of, Islam is kind of like this cultural thing, right? You know, it's like, oh yeah, I'm from that South Asian background, like cultural. Like someone said to me the other day, like they asked me like, why are you in a suit? I'm like, oh, I'm Muslim. And they're like, oh yeah, you know, like I'm Muslim too. Like I was like, oh, you should come to some of our MSA events. Like we'd love to have you. Like, and she goes, oh yeah, you know, like I'm gonna join the dance club just to sort of keep the culture. I'm like, right. Like just two completely different things. One of them is like completely outside of Islam, like nowhere close. But it's like I don't mean to pick on her specifically, but like the mindset is sort of like Islam is part of the culture, you know. It's not like, oh, Islam is my ticket to the hereafter. Islam is why I exist on this planet, you know. And that ticket can be purchased or what, if you will, by anybody, you know, no matter where they are. And like historically, this is what happened to everybody who became Muslim. Like that's why you have all these different cultures doing their own different expressions of their own culture, and then also they have Islam, and obviously Islam is supposed to triumph all of that. Like you don't like, oh, our culture says, you know, to say like for like Americans, like, oh, our culture says like drinking at X events. Obviously, we don't do that because we're Muslims, and the implementation of that isn't going to be perfect, but it should definitely be considered. I think there's two reasons why it's kind of like, I guess, muddied in the West. And I think one of them is historically Westerners and Muslims have like this kind of almost civilizational like battle. Like there's kind of, if you read history, you sort of see like, okay, there's Islam versus the West. I don't really like that paradigm, but historically, like if you want to talk about like civilizations, obviously not Islam as a religion, that has kind of been the case. And so then sort of like, and that's still, even if you don't care about any of the religious stuff or whatever, that's still in the back of a lot of people's minds. And the other thing is Islam is spread to the West in like a very unprecedented way in world history. And that's with the exception of like Black Americans in America during like the 60s and 70s. It's mostly spread through like mass immigration of Muslim ethnic minorities, or not ethnic from their own countries, but like, you know, you have Pakistanis, Arabs, you know, maybe East Africans, West Africans moving to the West. And that's how Islam is arriving in the West, building them masajid, stuff like that, which is pretty historically unprecedented. Obviously, you had traders and people moving throughout different parts of the world, but never on a scale of millions of people, thousands of miles away. And that, I think, that kind of has its own challenges, because then immigrants themselves are struggling to assimilate to the culture, to the new culture, especially when Islam can be different in some ways from that. That can be a big struggle. And then also it creates this perception in a lot of people's minds that Islam is the foreign religion. You know, the people who are Muslim, they come from other places and they come here. And so that's kind of their perception of Islam. And I think evidence for that is the fact that Americans' perception of Islam was much different in the 60s and 70s. Like my dad said this to me. He's like, if you were to like have this if like I was a kid, I don't know how he framed it, but it was something like, if like a long time ago, say in the 60s and 70s, if you told me like I want to become a Muslim, I would probably say something like, oh, like Muhammad Ali, you know? Whereas like that would never really be the first reaction of somebody today. It would probably be like, oh, like those Arabs, or like, oh, like those Pakistanis or whatever, depending on where you live. So it's interesting like how people's perceptions of Islam change based on, I guess, who the people that are Muslim are in their society.
That's fair. You know, you brought up an interesting point where people are saying basically like Islam is a foreign culture and they're behaving like it's like an invasive culture or whatnot. I mean, you didn't say that directly, but it was kind of alluded to in the conversation. I was looking at some posts today, and I think it was Slovakian. There was some Slovakian brothers, I think it was, and they became Muslim. Yeah. And then I only saw it because some guy said, "You're traitors to your people," and it's interesting that he used that term, because I was thinking, like, how is he traitors to his people? I mean, he apparently doesn't understand what Islam is. His perception of Islam is not a correct one, you know. And so it was very interesting to, you know, hear you say that, and then like look at that post and then put it all together all of a sudden, because it's like, yeah, okay, fair. People are seeing this. I mean, I understood already that people see it sort of like invasive and foreign, but it goes back to what you were saying, and I agree 100%, is that generally what happens with reverts is they tend to adopt the culture of local communities that are settled in America, and as opposed to like, well, I wouldn't say as opposed to, but it's sort of like a cohesive or a dual thing where it's like you adopt the religion and the culture, and it's not necessary to adopt the culture. And then so people see you as like some sort of traitor because now you're acting and dressing like those people. Like you said, you say mashallah, or you say yani, you're talking like those people now. And then so obviously it allows this divisive, adversarial type of mentality to take place. And it's not really necessary, you know, especially for us as reverts.
Yeah. No, and the tension, to be fair, I think a lot of that whole like race traitor stuff, I think that's somewhat true. It probably depends on the demographic, because most people, depending on where you live, like a lot of people don't really think like that. I think it's amplified heavily by like, you get a lot of these like really like, I don't like the term far right or whatever, but like you have like these like right-wing accounts that are like the anti-Islam right accounts that Muslims are constantly arguing with all the time. It's sort of like how like these like ex-Muslim accounts, or like no one would know about who those people are if like Muslims weren't always like reacting to every single outrageous thing they ever said. I'm like, who gives a damn about these people? Like, I don't even know you would never know who these guys were if they weren't like heavily just refuted or whatever. Right. And so I think that like I think what I was kind of alluding to with the whole cultural, I think it's more of a subtle thing. I don't know if it's necessary. I think it absolutely might inform people's direct comments. I think it's more of like a subtle thing of just people's perception of like the openness of Islam to everyone. You know, if they see like the only people converting to Islam, like, you know, it's not just that like their morals are different, they're praying and they're being more religious, they're more committed to God and stuff like that. They're not doing certain activities. It's that they're also adopting this new culture and stuff like that. Even if they have no problem with Muslims, they don't know much about Islam. it just might be like, okay, what are you doing? Like, okay, David's just like some cultural dissident, you know? Like, it was funny. One of my friends, like, this is like when I was much younger, like, he was like, oh, like, do you need a turban to go into a mosque? Like, that's what he said to me. He's like, he was being like very kind of tongue in cheek with it. Like, it wasn't like, oh, he's trying to be like some rabid Islamophobe. It's just, it's funny that I think I've looked back on it because like that sort of that comment sort of informs like how he sort of sees Islam. Whereas obviously, if you go to a masjid, you've been to a masjid, like most people don't wear like a turban. Even like people who are Arab, like most people just wear like everyday clothes to the masjid. It's not, yeah.
Understood.
But no, I know you're talking about Jan. Sorry, go ahead.
Jan?
Sorry, that's the brother you're referring to.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry, there's a little bit of a delay from you speaking.
Yeah, that's why I keep moving my headphone because I've got that thing I was telling you about. So,
yeah,
changing speed and changing direction, but kind of staying on topic. Where you mentioned the word Islamophobe, and I did a post yesterday, and I said, "Is it Islamophobia or are you unlikable?" Now, correct me if I'm wrong here. I want to get your take on this. I'm actually fine with Islamophobia, and I'll explain what I mean here. I'm fine with Islamophobia because this is what the Messenger of Allah, peace be upon him, faced. People hated him because he was a Muslim. They just didn't like him because of Islam, and he was a Muslim, and he told them to stop worshiping their old gods, and because he called to the Tawheed of Allah, and obedience to Allah. That's why they hated him. But when they spoke of him as an individual, he was known as Al-Sadiq. I'm not Al-Sadiq, but he was not Al-Sadiq, excuse me. But he was known as a truthful one. He was known as a person of good character, good mannerisms. He was known for his honesty and trustworthiness. So it wasn't him as a person. He had a lot of positive attributes. People absolutely thought highly of him. What they hated was the Islam. Nowadays, I don't think people can differentiate the two. I mean, I'm a Muslim, and I find a huge number of Muslims simply unlikable. They're just, this is my take, they go out of their way to be unlikable. And then you top this off with Islamophobia, which is they're going to hate you because you're Muslim anyway, in general. Maybe not everybody, but as a general statement, like Allah says in the Quran, they don't love you, but Allah speaks about it in the Quran. So it's like, why do you have to add negative attributes on top of a dislike that's already going to exist naturally? Now, I don't know what your experience has been, but my experience has been that Muslims are going out of the way nowadays, at least online. When you're offline, it's very difficult to find like a Muslim that's like just a bad man or just wanker like you find online. But online, where we have the biggest presence and the biggest set of eyes on us, I think good manners are probably more important than ever. You can't go and expect sympathy for our brothers and sisters that are being bombed out and killed in one place, and then you're being a jerk and a dickhead on another, and expect people to really care, and have sympathy for the plight of Muslims when you're not a sympathetic person in general as a Muslim. I don't know, what's been your experience with the online Muslim community, man? Mine has been so negative.
Oh boy, really putting me in the hot seat with this one. I know what you mean, man. Like it's like in every day, like everyday Muslims I meet are great people. Like most people are fine. Like there's no like hyper aggressiveness. I think the Muslim community on Twitter or X can be extremely hostile, especially if you disagree with like certain views. It's weird, dude. Like it's just like I don't really like the term Islamophobia either. Like if you read the Mehdi Locke's The Big Step, he talks about like that term was only coined in like the 90s. Like that's a pretty recent term. Like and I think that obviously there are people that hate Islam like Tommy Robinson and his crowd, but that's a small group of people. Like that's not like that many people who are just like out and about, like, oh man, like they dedicate themselves, like, yeah, this is where it says in the Quran that we should kill everybody, or what. Like that's a very small group of people. And I think it's just like it's heavily amplified online because the loudest voices get amplified due to algorithms. And also people spend all day just refuting these accounts. I'm like, why? Like it's just like you're not going to change that person's mind. It's just like gathering each, and then like they fight back, and then it's like each team is just like rallying around like a bunch of figures, and it just creates hostility that doesn't need to be there. Because then people start. I'm not saying these are good people. Like the people that are being enemies, like they're a-holes for lack of a better term. And it's just that people get the sense of like, oh, that must be everybody who's not Muslim, and I'm like, it's not. Like it's just not. It's a vast. Most people don't really care that much that you're Muslim. Like for better or for worse, there's like, oh, okay, he's Muslim. Like that's most people just want to live their own lives, mind their own business. They have better things to worry about than like the religion of whatever person they're talking to. Like that's not something that they care that much about. And I think that I worry that Islamophobia is going to become like one of these, like, and it already has in some circles, like this sort of like modern like race identity politics crap where it's like any criticism of a group or religion is seen as like they must just hate that religion or they must just hate those people. I'm like, not at all. Like I can criticize the actions of parties, and people do this all the time. It's not like sometimes it's from a place of hatred, but it's not always a place of hatred. And I think a lot of Muslims, just from dealing with people who start from that position of hatred, generalize that to everybody, and then that can really hurt your ability to talk to people who aren't Muslim and to give dawah, because then you start from this position of, oh, they're against me, they must hate me, starting from a position where most people just don't know anything or don't care. And so
making an interesting point. Yeah, sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah, no, I liked.
But you do make a very interesting point, and this comes back to what I was saying earlier about knowing the people you give dawah to. You know, one of the conditions of dawah is to know the people you give dawah to. You don't give dawah to a Buddhist the same way that you give dawah to a Christian. This is why this obligation takes place, because the dawah you give to one is not going to work on the other. So when you say this, it's like, you know, this automatic presumption of hate. We understand that doesn't exist. I worked at Tesla, and when I was there, I built a masjid because the company is like 70% Muslim, dude. It's crazy. Tesla Berlin is like run by Muslims, dude. If Muslims went on strike, the place would shut down. There was no prayer anything, no prayer spot, no musalla, no nothing. So I was like, hey, look, you know, I talked to one of the chiefs. He was in charge of a particular, I don't want to say anything because I don't know if it could get canceled or not. I really don't. I don't think it can. But I talked to one of the chiefs of one of the sites, and I said, hey, look, we're Muslims here. We're a huge group. We don't have a place to pray. And he's like, yeah, I knew you were Muslim from Family Day and this, that, because I brought both my wives, you know, on Family Day, company Family Day. And he was like, yeah, if I can do anything for you, I'll help you out, this, that, and the other, blah, blah, blah. I said, anything you need. And there was like maybe 2 or 3 people that had like an opposition to the entire idea of a masjid being established at Tesla. Maybe 2 or 3. I talked to some guys. There was one guy, I think he was Egyptian. And he used to just like really mess with these German guys. They had this whole thing going back and forth where they piss each other off. And so he was like flaunted in these German guys' face. But those are the only guys that I found hostility towards it. But in general, it was either indifferent or like, oh, okay, that's cool. And so I think it's important that a lot of like traditional Muslims, for lack of a better term, I like to do the quotes. Islamophobia also, I'll do the quotes because I don't have a better term for right now. A lot of the traditional cultural / Muslims need to understand it's like, you know, we understand you grew up and you were born and raised in Islam, but maybe you don't know the people who were trying to call to Islam, you know, because there's a lot of assumptions on both sides. There's an assumption of automatic hate and hostility on their side. You're a Muslim, you want to blow me up, you want to Allahu Akbar everything, you know, and then from your standpoint, the average American wants to blow up, you know, Palestinians in your country when they actually don't. They don't want to be involved in wars, and they're generally indifferent, you know, to Muslims as a whole. So I think it's very important for like a dawah scene and the understanding of dawah that, you know, there can't be this automatic presumption of hatred. That is a good point you brought there.
Yeah. I'll give you an interesting example of that. So I was talking, there was this German guy who was an exchange student for like a semester. And I was just chatting with him, and he was like pretty conservative. Like he was talking about the war in Ukraine. He was against them funding that. Like he was like, what are we doing? Like he was against a lot of the immigration. He was complaining a lot about the immigration stuff and stuff like that. And I was like, oh, like I was like, okay, I'm a little worried. Like I'm going to tell him I'm Muslim. Like I wonder how this is going to go down. He goes, Islam is a beautiful religion. And he was like asking me questions. He's like really wanted to learn more and whatnot. I was like, this is fascinating because this guy, like, he probably didn't have the best experience. Maybe, I don't know if that's what he's read online or what. I don't know where he got those beliefs, whatever. It's just, he had the nuance to be like, look, the religion is different from the behavior of maybe some Muslims in my country or whatever. And that's just not to say that like, oh, you know, like all these arguments about like immigration are like 100% true or false. Like, that's not really the point. It was just that somebody who even thought that was like, no, Islam is something I want to learn more about. Like he was actively reaching. It wasn't just like, oh yeah, you know, like that's cool. It was like he was actively reaching out and like, I want to talk to you about Islam. Like I want to learn more, like stuff like this.
Yeah.
And I just found that fascinating because it was like, it kind of goes against everything we just said. And that's because the only people you see online that are like the super anti-immigration types are like the biggest a-holes who are like also Zionists and like they support wars and all these things.
Yeah.
Tommy Robinson, Douglas Murray, like all these these evil people, for lack of a better term. And they're like just riling people up and stuff like that. These are not representative of like 99% of the population. But if you only see that, that's going to be your view of like, oh, that must be what like they are saying or whatever. And
sure.
It's very problematic. Yeah, it's very problematic. Yeah, no, it's like touch grass. Let's just talk, like just be a normal person and talk to people. Like most
go outside. The internet really is like not
bad.
entirely reflective of reality. Sorry.
Yeah, it's tough with the delay, but I just think like, oh, I just don't think people talk or like talk on like a deeper personal level with certain like non-Muslims, you know, because like we have non-Muslim family, like we talk to them about certain things. I'm not sure how your experience was with Islam, but like most people in my family, like, yeah, they might have objections to certain Islamic teachings. They don't hate Islam. They don't hate Muslims. Like they've seen the impact it's had on my life. They've seen the mostly positive things. They don't have a problem with being Muslim. It just might be they'll disagree with certain teachings or they might disagree with certain things, but they're not Muslim. Like I'm not like, oh yeah, like you're not Muslim, so of course you would agree with every single thing I say about Islam. That would be very unrealistic. Absolutely. Obviously, inshallah, everybody wants their families to be Muslim. We all want our people to be Muslim. But it's just, I feel like there's this weird, I think it's just that like, you have to speak to more people who don't think exactly like you. And yeah, the generalization thing is really problematic. Like I said, when I talk to most Americans, like Muslims in my circles who are not like always online, they're not like disagreeing with things I'm saying. They're not treating me like I'm some crazy person. Like it's like, yeah, obviously, like yeah, like I work for a non-Muslim company. Like my coworkers are fine. Like it's not that deep. Like and so yeah, I just think people's perceptions can get distorted, and I just worry that like the whole, like you talk about the Islamophobia, it just can be a total like, you know, it's sort of like how like racism, like you can just call someone a racist, and then like any argument they make is completely invalidated just like that. Even if it's like, okay, judging the behavior of groups or cultures or whatever, like even my own culture, like you and I, we're very critical of Western culture. We're very critical of a lot of the stuff going on. That's not, the difference is it's not coming from a place of hatred. Like when you're talking about, and I think that's when you're speaking about an issue, like where the point of where you're coming from really affects the way you deliver a message. Like if I'm saying, I was listening to a podcast and these two guys were talking about like the wars in the Middle East and how we have to stop them and whatnot. And like the way they were speaking about it, they were making a lot of the same points that I see a lot of Muslim speakers talk about. But the way they delivered it was much different because they are speaking at it from a place of like genuine love for their country. They're like, we don't want to be involved in these wars because it's hurting us. It's hurting America. It's hurting Americans. This is bad. It's evil. It's immoral. They're not coming at it from a place of our country's evil, blah, 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 blah. Everything's bad. And that always comes across when you speak to people. And so when you're like, look, I want things to be better. I'm very critical of these elements of our society. We have to improve them. You know, we have to improve. We have to have more moral discipline. We have to not have like sexual promiscuity, all these ills that are really hurting our society. We have to not have these things, but it's coming from a place of, I want America to be better because I live here. It's not coming from a place of like, oh yeah, you know, they suck, blah, blah, blah. It's just petty, man.
Yeah. For sure. I hear you. Conversation sometimes with accounts online. I know exactly what you're talking about, especially the thing with like Muslim women in hijab. Let's use this as an example of conversation. And guys will say, hijab. They'll use this whole, look at the women in the 1970s and look at the women now, you know, and you'll see some girl wandering around in a bikini in a black and white video or something, which is crazy because you had color in the 70s. But and then you'll see like, you know, a whole bunch of sisters in like niqab or whatnot in the modern day age. And it's just this entire conversation. And the conversation makes me mad because it's kind of a stupid one. And then I'm like, hey, look, man, you know, well, we don't want our women on OnlyFans. You know, it's like, so if you want to make like just crazy black, white arguments and discussions, we can do that. We know to this day, you can go to almost any Muslim country. There's very few where women don't just walk around uncovered. And when I say uncovered, like no hijab, they wear regular clothes like you find out here in the West.
Yeah.
It's commonplace. I think it's like maybe Iran and Saudi Arabia are maybe the only two places in the world where you actually don't find this taking place. You'll find hijab women, you'll find niqab women, and you'll find just regular women walking around. They all identify as Muslim.
I would say with Iran, like I think that's because of the laws more than anything.
Yeah.
Because I have friends who are from Iran and they're like, yeah, most people just completely lose their religion like that. There's so much stuff going on in the ground. And so, yeah, I'd say Indonesia. I went to Indonesia like a couple months ago. If you go to the rural areas, certain parts, most women are covered. But no, yeah, a lot of Muslim countries, it's like people aren't following the rules. It's just like, no, I think, yeah, there's a lot to work on in our own backyard in terms of,
for sure.
We start like trying to
ties into the whole conversation of people, these goofy conversations of like, you know, I can't remember where we were. We're talking about these adversarial conversations and ideas and concepts between Westerners and, you know, the hate and the dislike and whatnot. And a lot of this is stoked from just like ignorant people in general. I mean, you have ignorant people amongst the Muslims, you got ignorant people amongst the non-Muslims. But again, this comes back to knowing the people you're giving dawah to. Like these accounts that do this type of stuff, these are people who hate Islam. These are people who just hate Muslims. You know, if you argued with them logically, they wouldn't really have too much to say against you. Of course, you can't have a logical argument with these people. I've tried. But were you able to get through to them and say, hey, look, you know, look at what you're saying. Look at what you're comparing here and how this doesn't make sense on multiple levels on what you want for your women folk in your family and in your society in general as a whole. They'll generally agree with Muslims. They don't want a bunch of whores running around. They don't want like their women folk walking around with guys ogling on them and looking at them like they're a piece of meat. Most Western men don't want this. They accept it, but they don't want it. And this is why we see so many problems with the whole red pill, this, that, and where all this stuff popped up, you know, and guys are mad about how women are acting. But when it comes to Islam, all of a sudden the logic goes out the window. And this is where you can identify the difference between someone who hates Islam and someone like, you know, who's just indifferent to it in general. And so I think a lot of times online, Muslims tend to turn off the rationality. And then they go into this extreme, I like to call it outrage porn and what else we want to call it? Just emotional reactionism. And it's like, this is the most logical, spiritual religion there is, if you will. I don't know how else to say it. I'm not a hootie-doo spiritual type of guy. In that sense, I'm not a Sufi. But
yeah,
we've got the science of hadith. We've got the science of Quran. We got, you know, tafsir. We've got all these sciences in Islam that requires you to have a very strong sense of intellectualism, rationale, empiricism. But then when you go online and you start looking at these behaviors and how Muslims are reacting to like online people, it's like all this goes out the window and it's very damaging and harmful to dawah. You know, this is why this type of stuff needs to be left to people of Ahlul Ilm or the people who understand the people that they're giving dawah to and living amongst. This is my humble opinion. And this is, although I'm joking most of the time, like I said, I'm like holding up the mirror and like, just trying to take the mick on people. There is a partial amount of truth to it when I say some of the people need to go back because they're just damaging Islam's image in the West, and it might be irreparable, So there's that.
Yeah. No, yeah. I don't know about like I don't know about too much about like the immigration policy stuff, but like I see what you mean in terms of like behavior. I worry about that stuff too. I'm like, there's a really good Nietzsche quote. It's like, the worst thing to have for your argument is an idiot arguing on your behalf. Yes. And it's very accurate. I remember I saw your tweet a couple days ago where you were like, keep Dan Bilzerian away from Muslim Twitter or whatever. Yes. It's like, you're somebody who's interested in Islam. You're like, keep them away from the people online. And I can totally see that because like, I'm so glad that like my family members or whatever, they'd be so confused if they saw like half the stuff that goes on. It would just, it's very negative. But that's the good thing is most people aren't on Muslim Twitter. Most people are on their own community's Twitter. So the few times it's overlapped, it's been like kind of stupid. Sometimes it's been good, but most of the time it's just like people getting mad about stuff. But yeah, like I said, I think most people just kind of want to live their lives, and it's tough. I totally see what you mean. Like, I
like to take the mic also. So there's a combination there also.
Yeah, no, of course, yeah, no. Like, I mean, Twitter is very much like a provocateur's app. It's I think that this is why I think dawah primarily should be the mediums for doing it should be talking to people directly, or through like I think other things like maybe. I think YouTube can be good. I think shows, like if you do shows, talk shows, because then you're communicating in real time and like you can't like talk like an idiot. Like if you're talking to somebody directly, unless it's like one of those like dumb debates between like two people that hate each other, then you can have like a mutual exchange of ideas where it's like, okay, we're discussing the points. I think that stuff's useful. And then I think maybe Twitter should just be kind of an on-ramp for those types of things, So it can be a source of like, okay, here's how we can network so we can have the conversations either in person or like in this kind of podcast format. That can be very, very helpful. But in terms of like having like I don't do that. Like I never go in like these multiple tweet back and forths. Like it's just not worth your time. You're never going to convince the person. And it's just like, I got better things to do. I got a lot of stuff going on. Like,
fair.
But it's also the thing that bothers me is, and I don't have like a problem with like people having anonymous accounts. I do have a problem with people having anonymous accounts and just acting like the biggest a-hole of all time because there's no accountability. Because the thing is like, my friends are like, David, you shouldn't tweet under your name for X, Y, and Z career reasons or whatever. But it's like, tweeting under my own name and my own photo gives me a sense of accountability that I won't say something absolutely outlandish without thinking because there's no consequences. And so there's like more accountability. Obviously, the most accountability you'll have when it comes to your speech is speaking to someone directly. Like you would never talk in that sort of tone online. Isn't there like a Tyson quote that's something like that? Like,
about getting punched in the face.
It's like
Sheikh Ubaid, rahimahullah, he talked about this actually. He said that people online should actually use their real names. He wasn't a fan of anonymity. I tended, and you're right about this accountability type of thing. I've never gone out of my way to hide my online persona, but I've never been open about it either. So when I worked at Tesla, I made sure to never mention Tesla because I don't want to be seen as speaking on behalf of the company. This could be a problem. So if I mention the company, it could look like I'm speaking on behalf of them. A crazy thing just happened recently. So a subcontractor that worked for us at Tesla, I applied for work with them. And the manager that I'm supposed to work for, he just started following me on Twitter, and I was like, oh, God. So I wrote him, and I was like, "Hey, do I need to go on a deleting spree here?" And he was like, "Oh hell no!" He said, "This is hilarious, dude. You should have told me about this a long time ago." Yeah, so I don't know how that job's gonna work out, but
no, I know people. Yeah, no, it's definitely something to be like concerned of. Like I run my own business. It's not like something I care that much about, but in terms of like, I totally see what you mean of like being a spokesman and whatnot. It's just like I think that's why a lot of people get canceled. Is like you don't want to like be seen as it's really the brands maybe they don't care that much about, some of them might care about like some of the political correctness woke stuff. A lot of them just don't want to be seen. They know other people care about that, so they just don't want to be seen as someone who's associated with that. So it's like, oh, we have to fire them because they said X comment about whatever. And so it's just like, if you don't like talk, there's certain things I don't think you should maybe talk about online. Like I don't talk about who my parents are or anything like that. I don't think that's necessary.
oh, it's a good policy.
And I think it's very, it's because like there are some people that are just evil and will like try and destroy your lives and destroy other people you know's lives. I never post pictures of my family members. I never do anything like that. Like it's just, I don't share. Yeah, I don't share certain details about my life. Let's put it that way. Yeah. And so I think you don't want everybody knowing about that, because everybody knowing about that can be like some random dude who wants to destroy you for whatever reason.
Yep, sure. But one of the things I personally like to do, and this comes back to what you were saying about your face, I like to use my face because there is accountability for it. Anything I say online, I'll stand for offline. Yeah. You know, whether it's to Muslims or non-Muslims, whatever conversation, I stand by it, you know. And so even though I tweet it kind of crazy, I can stand by it because I can give context, even if it's kind of outlandish and wild, you know. But it's very, what's the word I'm looking for? Yeah, it's just very good for personal accountability when you think, because people seem to think that I'm speaking personally here now. Of course, this is general. Everyone should think about their situation and how they want to handle and live their life. But when I tweet, I have the understanding that this might meet me offline, you know, and so I'm actually more calculated in what I say than I actually appear. And part of that, I wouldn't be if I was anonymous. I have anonymous accounts, and I still practice that same policy, even though I'm anonymous. I don't go on and I'm not like just an unhinged wanker because I'm anonymous now. You know, it's just a general rule. You know, just be good to people, and hopefully they'll be good to you. And if they're not good to you, well, then this is what's the word? There's a word for it. They've removed that social contract of politeness between two individuals. Yeah.
That's fair. I think there's totally like utility for people remaining anonymous, especially depending on the industry you work in. Like people who, and I'm not going to comment on like the permissibilities, like people who work in finance, for example, like they are insanely strict on like what you're allowed to say. Like I have friends who are like, someone was telling me that like JP Morgan had like a policy where like, if you say like one thing in support of the campus protests, like boom, like we will fire you unconditionally. That's it. And they're like really like, they're insane. Like they're like super diligent about that stuff. So certain industries, like I know friends who are just like no social media presence at all. They don't believe in that at all. Like it's just like, whereas like, I think it just depends. Like that's one example I can think of in particular, but
for sure.
Maybe it sounds like maybe where you work, they're a little more lenient if your manager's like looking at your tweets and is like, yeah, that's fine. Like,
so Tesla's very woke. Tesla is super woke. You don't wanna say anything crazy. They've got like woke management, and those that aren't woke, they still gotten caught up in like in America. When I first started there, they had like some legal case where some guy got like a couple of million for racism, and so they were very careful. It's like, if you say something stupid, you're probably going to get fired, you know. And that wasn't just woke. That was just like, hey, it's expensive. You know, that if you say something on the job, someone gets offended and then they sue us.
Oh, that's
it's just expensive for the company, you know. But then the management is also woke in that sense.
Yeah.
But now we're just all over the place. My friend, we have been on for 1 hour. I generally don't go over 1 hour.
That's fair.
You got anything you want to plug? Business, book, website?
Yeah. So yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at the real Doy DOY99. I publish audiobooks, Islamic audiobooks. So we've got about 5 of those on Audible. If you just Google my name or if you search my name on Audible, you can see those there. We did Jonathan Brown's recent book. We've done some bunch of different genres, and we're currently our company just acquired the rights to the Yusuf Ali translation of the Quran. And we're currently making a multicast audiobook for it. So we're going to have voice actors playing all different parts. There's going to be a soundscape and high edits and sound design, stuff like that. It's going to sort of, when you listen to it, it's going to sort of feel like you're actually there in some of the scenes. So that's going to be coming out in probably November or December. And that one's like on Audible. So like that one will be published by us since we have the rights to it. So you'll be supporting our work if you purchase that. And yeah, it'll be available on Audible towards the end of the year, inshallah. And then we also, so that's kind of, you can also just check out our website. If you're like an author or publisher, want to have us do your audiobook, just go to audioilm.com. That's our company.
Audio Ilm?
And yeah.
Hey.
Yeah, Audio Ilm.
I'm going to check that out, inshallah.
Yeah. No, we got a few titles. That's kind of like what my main sort of thing that I do in terms of business. But inshallah, it should be good. And you can follow me on Twitter. I think that's pretty much where I post most of my stuff. And yeah, I thank you so much, Abdurrahman, for having me on here. This has been a great conversation. And this is great. Alhamdulillah.
Okay, so Barakallahu Feekum for everybody who tuned in. We're going to be back next week. I don't know what happened to I keep losing all my co-hosts. I don't know where I guess they commit suicide. Is it that bad co-hosting with me? Astaghfirullah, they commit suicide. But I don't know. I keep losing my co-hosts. But no matter what, I'm going to be here, guys, every Wednesday, inshallah. I'm probably not going to do around this time. It's too close to Maghrib. So it's like pray and jump on or jump off and then pray immediately. So I'm probably going to change the time frames. But every week, Wednesday, inshallah, I'm going to try to add another show. Thanks, bro, for coming on the show. It was definitely an interesting conversation. We went all over the place with it, but it was good to hear your story and what you're doing. Check out his stuff, audioilm.com. Check him out. I'm going to check it out for sure. And we will see you next week, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum